welcoming my colleague, Dr. Ray Smith, to talk about hay preservatives and additives. Are they working and can we afford them, right?
Thank you, Gary. So we obviously don't want this in our hay. We don't want mold growth. And there's really a pretty simple solution to not having mold growth in hay. The best way to reduce mold growth, that second sentence, is to dry hay quickly and store it at low temperature, store it at low moisture. But you knew that already, so I don't need to tell you that. But now let me preface what I'm going to say the next few slides by something there with the first sentence. Bacteria and fungi are already present on the standing crop, in the swath and in the bale, regardless of what you do. When I was at the University of Manitoba, we were doing some research on just the amount of bacteria, yeast, mold biomass, or fungal biomass in the crop. And it can be 1 to 1.5% of the biomass of that crop. What I'm saying is there's a lot of bacteria, fungi, yeast as well that are beneficial, that are just part of the whole ecosystem. Particularly the yeast, for example, are UV protectors on the surface of the plant. So they're there, but if you get the crop drying quickly, then they're not able to grow and proliferate in the bale. And so that's the whole point when we talk about preservatives. Before I mention preservatives, we used to hear a fair bit about compounds that could make the hay dry faster. For example, potassium carbonate increases the speed of drying, can even increase digestibility. I've got their increased molding just from the standpoint that if you, what these do is they disrupt the waxy cuticle on the stem of legumes. The increase in molding would be if they're a bit on the wet side, or particularly if you had it rained on, you might actually, disrupting that cuticle may help mold growth. But the long and the short is I'm going to say that very few people, in fact you can tell from this old piece of equipment I've got in the picture, very few people use these things like potassium carbonate. Mainly the use in trying to keep mold from happening, keep bacterial growth from happening, are preservatives. And I'm going to go through several examples of those. So just as a point of reference to start with, the recommended moisture contents, these are just averages for safe storage of various bale types. So for small square rectangular bales, typically we talk about 16 to 18% moisture. Round bales with a soft center, 14 to 16. Round bales with a hard center, down to 13 to 15% moisture. And large rectangular really need to have quite low moisture because they're packed in so tight and there's so much area for the moisture to be so much, the moisture inside the bale just can't escape. So when we're talking about moisture contents well above, say greater than 3%, the suggested levels, particularly on the large type bales, their temperature is going to rise substantially. The warm, moist conditions in that wetter hay provide an ideal environment for growth of bacteria, yeast, molds, other fungi. So hay preservatives, simply put, I'll give you more details, but they work simply put by inhibiting or reducing the growth and activity of these aerobic microorganisms. So all of those listed there that are a problem in causing spoilage in hay are aerobic microorganisms. We're not excluding nitrogen. We're not excluding oxygen. We're not wrapping the hay if we were making baleage. So we're talking about aerobic microorganisms. Several types of hay preservatives, 4 main categories actually: organic acids and their salts, bacterial inoculants, sulfur-based preservatives, and ammonium-based additives. Some of these products may even include enzymes to help break down the surface layer of that hay so that the sugar content can come out and be more easily used by, for example, the bacterial inoculants, also antioxidants and nutrients. So first of all, organic acids, and that's what most of us think about, particularly the propionic acid. When they're applied, they act as a fungicide, you might say, by producing an acid environment which is not conducive to mold, yeast, bacterial growth. 2 of the main acids used are propionic and acetic, and since they're naturally occurring in the the rumen of animals, they're safe for all types of livestock. So people often ask the question, I don't want, they usually, if they don't want to use it, they won't even say propionic acid. They'll say, I don't want that acid-treated hay. There's no harmful effect on the animal. It does have a little different smell than normal hay, so if you have a preference choice and you have this hay that was treated, this hay that was not, sometimes the animals will go toward what's not treated. Sometimes they go toward what is treated because there's more leaves on there, you've got more preservation of the nutrient compound. But there's no reported of any problems with using the organic acid treatments as far as the health of the animal. So as I mentioned, propionic is one of the main ones of those, many different formulations that different companies sell. So it's lowering the pH, inhibiting microbial growth that results in heat damage and molding. Now the problem with the early types of organic acid, the early products, is they often were quite corrosive on machinery and even dangerous to their operators. So buffered acids have been developed, and most all of the types of organic acids sold now have been in some ways buffered or neutralized or pH balanced, and those include the propionic, acetic, and formic acid. And that's something to notice, though, particularly if you go to a dealer and they have a really good deal on a propionic acid. It's good to find out whether it's buffered, because that's going to help with your machinery, even help with your safety. Now, a number of compounds that are out now, a number of products actually have mixtures. For example, propionic and acetic acid. The propionic acid is highly effective against mold growth, while the acetic acid is more effective against bacteria and yeast. And again, different distributors are available in liquid and granular forms. Just make sure to follow the instructions. Particularly as more products are available and there's what you might call more generic products, the percentage of propionic acid, it may range from 10% to close to 100%. So just like buying a herbicide, you obviously get a better value if you buy a more concentrated version. Okay, bacterial inoculants. There's three main types: fermentation enhancers, aerobic spoilage inhibitors, and antibiotic-producing bacterial inoculants. So the fermentation enhancers often are what we think about with bacterial inoculants. So we often think about silage inoculants. Again, we're not talking about silage, we're talking about an aerobic condition. So silage inoculants were developed as fermentation enhancers, and some of those are sold for hay preservation. Most contain lactic acid containing bacteria. They compete with yeast and mold, forming organisms to try to maintain better forage quality. However, most lactic acid producing bacteria require anaerobic conditions and acidic conditions to work at their optimum. And so they're probably not, obviously that's not going to occur much in a bale except maybe a large dense rectangular bale. When using this class of inoculants on hay, the plant sugars need to be high because they are substrate for the bacterial growth to provide the best protection against mold and yeast. So what I mean by that is to take a low quality hay that gets rained on and you say, well, it's too wet to bale, so I'm going to use this bacterial inoculant, lactic acid producing inoculant. If you don't have the readily available sugars for the bacteria to grow, they're not going to have the preservation. So high quality hay is the best to preserve with the bacterial inoculant. The effectiveness also depends on the ability of the introduced strains to compete with the microorganisms already on the hay. So I gave that example. The inoculants are usually ineffective on rained-on hay because the hay microorganisms have exploded with their population size, and you're trying to compete against it with what you're putting on there. Okay, another main type of inoculant or bacterial type inoculant are the aerobic spoilage inhibitors. One example there, the Lactobacillus strain that I have here, that's a group of bacteria that restrict the growth of spoilage type organisms such as yeast and molds. The mode of action is thought to be due to secondary metabolites. Recent research indicates that they are usually much more effective than the fermentation enhancer group. Another newer type of bacterial inoculant, and I can't even give you product names for this one, but you can talk to the distributors over here. These have been selected from the natural environment to survive desiccation after application to the cut crop, and they work by producing antimicrobial compounds which inhibit sometimes even stop the growth and reproduction of molds and other spoilage microorganisms. Now, a couple of comments. The use of these products require very specific management conditions. One requirement is that they're applied on the crop as it's being mowed. The aim is to suppress those naturally occurring yeast and mold populations that can increase during hay curing, especially at the bottom of moist windrows and other wet, what we might call hot spots. Something to remember with all bacterial inoculants, and good to good to remember this with herbicides as well. Use pure and clean water for mixing. If you're using city water, then the fluoride in the water can kill the bacteria or different purification agents. Algae and dirty water can affect the ionic charge of the inoculants. Hot water or warm water can greatly reduce product effectiveness. So think about all of those things when you're not just thinking about the product that you're using, but making sure that you're using clean water. There's also some sulfur-based preservatives, another type that can offer some control against microbial proliferation. Sulfur compounds are widely used in human and animal food sectors as preservatives and work essentially the same way in hay through oxygen scavenging type mode of action. In hay, they create an environment within the hay bale that's unconducive to microbial growth from mold and yeast development. Okay, one last type of preservative that's really not used much, but it's worth mentioning because you've probably heard about it, is simply using anhydrous ammonia, a very effective preservative, but its main use is for actually increasing the non-protein nitrogen amount in low-protein grass hay. So not only is anhydrous ammonia, like I say, it can be effective, but it can also be quite dangerous. So you'd want to be very careful before you would try this to make sure that you're following strict guidelines. This is showing you how they're injecting it under the hay bale, but remember you want the hay bales completely covered before you start injecting. And if you're using anhydrous ammonia to preserve a high moisture, high quality hay, particularly high protein hay, you can have actually toxic compounds produced that then will cause some real problems with your animals. Okay, I apologize for not getting more into the economics, the specific economics of using these products. But what I want to, first of all, encourage you, and in talking to many hay producers, and probably some of you sitting out there, your goal, whether you have a preservative tank on your equipment or not, is still to try to dry the hay naturally, to get it down to low enough moisture that you can preserve it. That's going to save the most money. When you do use these products, it's great to have that option for when it's about to rain, or maybe it's early in the spring and you're having a real difficulty drying. Check closely into the effectiveness of different products that you're looking at. For example, the propionic is very effective, but the concentrations needed are quite high. The bacterial inoculants, I mentioned some that can be very effective as well, but you want to follow up closely with your distributor to make sure that that's a product that will fit in your conditions. So I'm going to finish there and be glad for questions.
Take a couple quick questions for Ray. Yes, Chris.
I've seen a trend of producers trying to dry hay down and say you get pretty close, but it's not quite there. Actually rolling that hay up or baling it and then wrapping it as a way of preserving that hay. Have you seen that in Kentucky? Kind of below optimal moistures for siling?
I have, Chris, and I hear a lot of good testimonials. It always scares me because there can be some real problem compounds produced in that kind of wet hay that's wrapped. Now, where I feel more comfortable with it is in the fall of the year. You're having trouble getting the hay dried down. It's a little bit over the optimum moisture. The conditions are already cool. You're going to feed it during the winter to go ahead and wrap it and just kind of keep it. It's like you're keeping it in a refrigerator. I feel much more comfortable. In the middle of the summer, again, I've heard testimonials where it's worked, but I have a hard time explaining how it preserves it. People talk about, well, I just don't have any oxygen in here for spoilage, and that's true, but it's hard to think about how we can completely get the oxygen out. I would like for us as researchers to do a little bit more into that because it is becoming more common. But I also know of a number of producers that are wrapping completely dry hay. It's already gone through a sweat, so they can store it outside. And in that case, they're just storing it like they're storing it in a barn. They're just completely wrapping it. but it's essential in that case to make sure it's completely dry.
One more question. Yes.
Right, that barn example, they can deduct that plastic, but they've got to depreciate the barn, so they prefer the plastic.
Okay, good point. So being able to store with using the plastic for that, good point, Carl.
It's probably pretty expensive, though.
It is expensive, but if you figure, the people that I've known that have tried it, it's like they don't have a barn and they hate wrestling with tarps, and so it's a way to make sure they've got high quality hay, though it is expensive. One thing about wrapping dry hay, you don't need to go with 6 wraps. You know, a couple of wraps are going to be fine because you're just trying to keep the rain from getting in.
Let's give Ray a big round of applause. Thank you, Ray.